All righty.
All right, John. I think I found the record button and we're underway.
All right. Thank you. Um, you are all leaders. The quote I have at the bottom is about that. And I just want to use this as a frame for what we're going to do today. I think it's especially a national issue right now, and it's what's made me think about it. But the thing that we want leaders of our country to do is no different from what you and I have thrust upon us. That is to say, what I want from leaders, and if I'm a kid, I want it too. First of all, I want leaders to be honest about the state of things, how it's going, how much do we know about what the future holds. Second, I want leaders to mobilize resources that they will coordinate and use for my benefit as a student. So we'll talk about that a little bit today, coordinating things that are beyond our direct reach to kids. And second, I want to have hope, but I want it to be credible hope that people give me. And fourth, I want my leaders to make validating connections with people who are in our sphere. There are 30 of us in this organization, Research for Better Teaching. I'm like the principal. So I think about these things every day. I don't think about the 30 people who work for me as my students, but I certainly feel responsible for keeping us in connection and for keeping us learning. So I'm certainly in this with you. So here are a few other opening thoughts. You've all heard the phrase, we're flying the airplane while bolting the wings on, but this is a time when there's more than that we have to do. We have to fly the plane while inventing what flight is. The second opening thought is that we have compassion for ourselves. A friend of mine has used the term, give ourselves grace, because we're all novice now at trying to figure out how to serve our students and as leaders, how to serve our faculty members. A teacher said to me yesterday, how am I going to deal with this? It takes me hours to prepare for this. And I couldn't give her reassurance that it wouldn't take a lot of time in the future to get ready for this, but I could assure that we're all going to get better at it and won't take as much time as it does now. I was talking to my son, who's a Spanish teacher in South Burlington, Vermont, before this webinar. And I must admit, he's very efficient at using his office hours. He teaches high school now. He used to teach elementary and middle. So there are efficiencies that we can learn from one another. This document that you see in front of you is one that I will send by email to all of you. But every time that we have a webinar, there'll be a time when I accumulate ideas from folks like yourself and add to it. So I'm going to have each one be an iteration of these conversations about these topics. So it will be, in a sense, a collection point for ideas on these 6 topics. I have experienced the same thing that many of you have, especially those of you who are classroom teachers. I'm working more and harder now than I was before school closed. And that has to do, especially with those of you who have children at home, we'll have to take care of them too. In terms of self-care, here are 3 ideas I'm sharing just for the benefit of the 20 or so of us on this webinar right now. There is a TED Talk subsite called Connects, and that is the address of it, the email address, and you'll have it electronically if you want to click on it later. But there are some really useful talks there. Elizabeth Gilbert surprised me, as some of you, I read Eat, Pray, Love, and it was fun, but she is a person who's accumulated a lot of wisdom about how to deal with feelings over the years. And I think that talk is particularly worth listening to. Another thing that I'd recommend just for our enlightenment is the film Empire of the Sun, Steven Spielberg's 1987 film. And the reason I think it's useful is it is about how people respond in crisis, this particular crisis. is a group of Brits who are put into a Japanese prison camp, and there's some Americans there too. But I think that the point of the movie is it shows how people respond to crisis, sometimes bringing out the dark side, and many characters have their best side brought out. Especially the principal character, played by Christian Bale when he was 13 years old. And he actually is 13 years old as the actor doing that film. And finally, I never saw The West Wing during the years it was broadcast, but I do find it different from other programs that are available right now because it's good people trying to do good things when there are no easy choices, no win-win solutions. And so I think it highlights the dilemmas we find ourselves in now trying to serve our kids. So, end of opening ideas. Let us get into the topics. I'll spend a few minutes on each one with some particular ideas that I've run across since this crisis has been upon us. And then I will open the door for discussion and for questions. So the first one has to do with being in connection with our students and to the degree possible, putting them in connection with each other. And I'm pretty sure that represented in this audience today are people whose kids come from stable, safe environments. I would expect, Susan, most of Eastchester is like that, and Mamaroneck was. And then there are students who are without connection and without stability and without safety at home. Sometimes in more affluent communities, it is surprising that students are like that. If Port Chester was part of this BOCES, I'm sure you would find some students like that. There are many, all cities have zones where students find themselves in that position. It doesn't just mean they don't have internet. It means that the household is not necessarily a predictable or a safe space to be. So the ways of remaining in connection are a little different when the dog is licking your face, like he is for you now. I love the visible part of this. See, there's somebody staying in connection with you. Tell me your first name. The address there is like a compound of your first name and your last name.
Yeah, my name's Deidre Kioshin.
Thanks, Deidre. Where are you and what do you do?
I'm in Canton, Ohio. I'm curriculum coordinator for our district.
Ah, very good. Is it Canton City?
Plain local schools. So we've done a lot of work with you with our ESC.
Yes, indeed, on making students thinking visible. But did you say your first name was Kira?
Deidre.
Deidre. Okay. Well, Deidre, glad to have you with us as well as your dog.
Yeah, that's Darwin.
Darwin. All righty. I think there are at least conceptually 3 different levels of being connected with our kids. The first level here is when they walk in the room, you say, hello, how are you, John? How are you, Deidre? That is being greeted, recognized, acknowledged. And then the second level is our interactions have made you conclude, even if tacitly, I value you. And then the third kind is I'm engaged with you in doing something that is meaningful. And I think it's worth thinking about what level we are on when we're doing something to either connect ourselves with students or get them connected with one another. So here are 5 ideas about ways to do that. And what I'd like you to do is take a minute and read them and decide which ones are most appropriate for kids who are already in safe homes and which ones are more appropriate for kids who are in less safe or unstable homes. Take a second, if you will, and read through those 5. When we get to the second half of this webinar, I'll open it up really and invite everybody to speak. But just to get the thinking between us started, I'm going to ask individuals to respond. So Susan, would you mind unmuting your mic?
Yeah.
And what are your reflections about stable versus unstable in these 5 things, just off the top of your head?
Yeah, I think that for stable, you know, there could be the anything that requires the student to have, internet access or a computer. So something like an email may seem like an easy thing to do, but you're not going to be absolutely positive that it's actually getting to where, where you want it to be.
Right.
And the same thing with number 2, asking the students to check in on a classmate. And, that may be more challenging if students don't have access to technology, or you might be asking a student from a stable environment to check in on a student from an unstable environment. And that's, can be a little bit tricky.
Check. Greg, is there a hand raising function on this webinar?
Yes, John, there is. So if participants click on the participants button at the bottom center of their screen, it'll open up a list of all the participants. And then there's actually a hand raising, a yes, a no, a bunch of different icons that people can use. So if you'd like to use the hand raising, I can monitor that.
Yes.
Or you can see it yourself and then call on me, whichever is easiest for you, John.
Well, from time to time, I'll invite hand raising, and then I'd say, let's put it off now until later. Is there anyone else who'd like to raise their hand on these 5 ideas with any kind of a comment? All right, no hand.
We have one.
Okay, let's do it.
Z Muzio, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself and sharing.
Sure.
You're still muted.
Still muted.
Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
Hey.
Go.
Zulmira, Zulmira. This is my name, not the abbreviation for my email. I think unstable. I don't really understand. I didn't understand what Susan said. She says 1, 2, 3 for safe, but 3 for me, in my opinion, would be for unstable. Is that what you said, Susan?
Yes, no, I would agree with that. A handwritten note, especially if it's going to use the U.S. mail system, would be more likely to get through to somebody who has, to a kid who has restricted email access. And by unstable, I was really talking about kids who live in environments that sometimes lead to trauma because they are unpredictable. So what I'm trying to highlight here is simply that all of us will have some kids like that. And so they are the ones who particularly are experiencing or may experience grief. You know, it won't show up in the way of grief when somebody passes away in your family, but the loss of contact with friends and with, well, just this reminding me, a study was once done of one of the reasons kids give for why they go to school. The number 1 reason is to interact with my friends. And everything we're doing turns out to be relatively secondary to them. For many kids, of course, wanting to learn well comes on the list too. So I feel even with the mature, capable adults who are members of Research for Better Teaching, that it's my job to figure out ways, sometimes it's through work, but it's often at a personal level for people to be in contact with one another. All righty, here are some more ideas that have to do with community or being in contact with one another. There are lots of games that kids are already playing online. And there are also a lot that are available for academics. though there's a couple of good new math games that Lucy West and her colleagues have put online at the address that I have here. We're getting away from the academic kind of thing, however, and still sticking with the ways for being in connection that are in these other ideas here. Is that the online environment is inviting us to come up with a lot of ideas that are also applicable when we have the kids back in the classes with us. It is not just for online. And when we get to ideas that have to do with good pedagogy for being online, I think we find the same thing to be true. I have been in contact with some people who have decided to emphasize their connection with parents. That I think is a really important idea to consider. This one here is inviting parents to contribute ideas to you and me that we could do with their kids through the online environment. But also way to have some sort of open bulletin board with parents where they can ask questions. It is very easy for you and me and for the teachers we know to become overwhelmed with trying to stay in contact with everybody. So I wouldn't engage on communication with parents in any extensive way until I first figured out how I'm doing, how it's going with the things I'm trying to do for my kids. Those of you who are in the elementary grades, there are many of you, especially in Westchester, who have done responsive classrooms and Open Circle and other programs of that nature where the beginning of the day is a classroom meeting of some sort. That is inherently a community builder. But if not, then, and this is more true for people who teach at the secondary level, I would look for ways to do community building with the students. In secondary school, as you're all aware, I'm sure, a kid can go through most of the year without even knowing the names of everybody else in their class. And I learned the most in my 10 years of classroom teaching from a high school teacher named Gene Stanford, who wrote a book called Developing Effective Classroom Groups about the efficacy of doing this with secondary kids. Chris Deere is a high school teacher who was aware of the loss his seniors were experiencing from not having prom and not having their graduation ceremony. And so this is a site where you can just go and read the letter he wrote to them. The reason I'm recommending it is he is aware on the one hand of the need to acknowledge the feelings and the losses that students have, and yet there's quite a bit of uplifting in it and hopefulness. And it's written from me to you kind of surround sound so that it feels very personalized for the kids. The language that we use, either in writing or in verbal communication, with attention to, and is part of how they judge how authentic we are in wanting to make connection with them. These are two sites where I find another set of ideas that I didn't bother to list here because they're accessible through that. I didn't want to make this too long. But I would recommend both of them to you. And remember that I'm sending you by email this whole document so that you don't have to copy anything down directly from it.
Hey, John, could I jump in for just a second? Because we had a question from Sandra. If you went back up to the online bulletin boards, she had a quick question just about what you meant by an online bulletin board.
Ah, okay. Was it in, Susan, who is it that asked the question, Greg?
Sorry, it was Sandra Chan.
Sandra Chan. Sandra, where was I talking about that? Can you unmute yourself?
A little bit farther up.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on. Nope, sorry, down past that.
Oh, okay.
When you were talking about connectivity, you were talking about having, there in the middle, start your own class bulletin board and nominate a class connector.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have some ideas for what kind of a class bulletin board we could do online?
Well, my son's school district in Vermont has uh, a site for the school only. And so every class has a section in which every teacher can start an ongoing interactive chat. The one that we're using at RBT is Slack, S-L-A-C-K. And any teacher can sign on to Slack, it's free, and create a Slack chat room where only those who join can interact and talk back and forth. You don't have to leave it on all day. We do at RBT because it's a way of letting people do their work on their computers online, but at the same time be able to like fly a note on a glider into somebody's lap. So Slack is another way to do it. So either the district's own service, if they have that capacity, or Slack, which anybody could join.
So your understanding is it's more like a chat feature that the kids can just talk to each other with, or kids and teachers?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you.
John, also for participants that are using Google at their district, Jamboard, Jamboard, is another collaborative tool that was really designed for like collaborative whiteboarding and like posting of sticky notes and whatnot, but could also, I imagine, be used for the same purpose that you mentioned here.
Great. Does anybody else have any suggestions for that kind of connectivity? All righty. Creeping up on the academics, but not there yet. These are ideas for self-care and care for others. And this isn't just for you and I and our self-care. It's also a category that has to do with having kids think about whom in their environment they can be an attender for, a caregiver for. And so here are three sort of low-key ideas for that. I'll give you 60 seconds to read through those. As you're doing it, keep in mind this question. If we want kids to do something for other people, they have to do it in a protected way that protects themselves, but it also protects the other people. So that's why I mentioned latex gloves here. If a kid's going to go down the apartment hallway and slip something under a person's door, you don't want the thing you slip to wind up infecting them if you are asymptomatic and have the virus. So anyway, give you a few seconds to read through this. I'm dragging my feet a little here on getting through the agenda. This is always the exact same issue we all have when we're teaching a class, right? Depth versus breadth. So I'm going to accelerate a little bit and then open it up for any comments or questions you want to ask about the various suggestions. Now, you've already probably, I'm guessing from people I've been talking to over the last couple of weeks, spent a lot of time with your colleagues on how to do the regular academics that we are all obligated to find an alternative way of delivering. So the ideas here about academic tasks are emphasizing the higher level thinking part. That is to say, how can we make the academic tasks we're giving kids engaging and interesting, but at the same time cause higher level thinking? Now, one of the resources that we have available is virtual field trips. These happen to be 3 that are well regarded. I think that the challenge for us is what are the things that we want the kids to look for or think about as a result of having done the virtual field trip? And that is a great topic for a PLC. So the discussion is, if we're going to go to the San Diego Zoo, right, cool, whole lot of information about animals. What do we want the kids to think about in relation to those animals that would cause them to think more deeply about it? So here is a question about the relationship of anteaters to giraffes. You know, this is kind of like the Darwinian evolution question in the background. Yeah, what do they have in common? They both have long necks. Yeah, but besides that, what do they have in common? And what I want to do is frame the question so they're getting at the reason that they evolved to have long necks. So the main point I want to underline here is to use virtual field trips as a way to develop higher level questions with my colleagues about whatever the virtual field trip is. Folks have recommended to me that you can go on a ride in Disney World virtually. Well, I went on a few of them. You know what? They're pretty boring. You go on Space Mountain, you don't get any feeling of going up and down. So what could I do with that would actually be academic engaging? And one of them is to get a debate started among the kids about which of the rides has the most to learn from. Besides, I'm terrified of going down a steep hill on Space Mountain. There are there isn't any kid who doesn't have books to read, and they're often assigned to do them. And the ideas on this page have to do with sort of jazzing up the way in which kids are reading books and answering questions about the books. The first question is more around convention. That is to say, instead of me leading the discussion, I'm going to put kids, if I have this resource, into breakout rooms and give them a thought quote. I like Zoom. It's not the only one you can do that with, but I like moving around into the various breakout rooms with our people at RBT in order to hear what the discussions are, and sometimes I chime in and sometimes I don't. The most important part of this, however, is that there are some norms that the kids are expected to follow, such as make sure everyone's voice is heard. Otherwise, it's very easy for a kid to dominate the discussion. Now, this is one that I'm particularly recommending. There are talk moves that teachers do when they conduct a discussion that is robust. I'll define robust as the kids are talking more than the teacher. There are side effects. Actually, there's an online course we have about them in which Susan Chester, who was on this call, appears as a teacher doing it with her students, but it lends itself very much to online teaching and learning. But you have to teach, you have to tell the kids you're going to do it first. Otherwise, it will strike them as weirdly different. Weirdly in the sense that when you don't respond to a kid's answer, whether it's right or wrong, and you ask another student what they thought of it, the kids may reach all kinds of conclusions about why you're behaving differently. You know, in this method of conducting robust discussions, I don't answer kids' questions. I ask another kid to comment on it or respond to the kid questions. Some kids may feel like they're being put on the spot. So we have a chemistry teacher on our website who is doing this for a discussion about how to balance chemical equations. And when the day she starts it, she explains to kids why she's doing it. The video of her explaining it is there too. It's a side point, but of some significance about using these skills. Some of you know this under the name of accountable talk. This is like accountable talk on steroids because it means I have to really think about things I'm going to give up, like talking as much as I'm talking now, or being the center of being at the center of the stage. And it also means not jumping in and helping kids to the degree that I actually answer the question or tell them what to do that they're not seeing yet they have to do. I have to give that up and put kids in discussion with one another. Now that is a wonderful thing to do in either total group or small group online instructional periods that you're having on whatever platforms you're using with kids. Another one that I set my high school teacher son on today is using reciprocal teaching in online environments. Now, if you don't know what reciprocal teaching is, which could clearly be the case, it's worth Googling that and spending a couple of hours learning what it is. Reciprocal teaching is one where each student in a group has a role, and it is run by, the whole thing is run by the students. I have videos of kids doing it down to second grade. So one kid is the reader of a page or a section of a novel they may be reading together. It also could be a textbook. Another kid is the summarizer, another kid is the clarifier, et cetera, et cetera. Once you have taught your kids how to do this, to either chat rooms or breakout rooms, and have them do it, and you can move around to various other rooms. So this is a way of doing several things simultaneously. First of all, dealing with the academic content. Second, giving students agency and empowerment to actually be in charge of their own learning. The roles in reciprocal teaching rotate among students, so a different person would be the reader or a different person the clarifier every day. And it's a way for you to have all the students active at the same time in a way where nobody's in a passive role. So what I'm suggesting is that one use reciprocal teaching if you already know how to do it in breakout rooms, and if you don't, it's a great topic for PD, for you and your whole grade level, or for the 4 of you who teach earth science, you know, whatever it is. It would be a way to get text read more closely and more, especially for dense text, by more students. All righty. This assignment here is connected to doing things that are meaningful beyond the actual meaningful and important content that you have in the academic content you're dealing with students. So the meaningful part, and this is for students who have albums. Not everybody has a family album at home, but if you do, then go through the album with somebody in your family to create a story. And it could be a story about an exotic uncle who was a pirate, or an uncle who disappeared. Oh, I have a first cousin in New York City who's surfaced some bizarre stories about my maternal great-great-grandfather was beat up by a cop on the street of New York. And she didn't take it lying down, even though after he hit her with a stick, she was lying down. So anyway, whatever the stories you find out about the people in the album may be more mild than that. But the thing is that there are stories in there, and then the kids can be asked to do something with the story that requires academic skill or academic investment of some kind. The same kids who do not have albums or home video, somebody in the family, even if you have to call them up by the telephone. And if you don't have anybody in your family who'll sit still long enough to do that, figure out a way to call somebody else that you know and interview them about an event that changed their lives, or that was important to them in some way. And then you take your academic skill set that's being worked on, whether it's organizing thoughts for a verbal presentation, creating a written piece, illustrating the story with pictures and captions, you know, whatever is appropriate for your kids. But the source of information that begins to tap the academic skills is something personal that somebody in the family has experienced. The PLC connection to this is what questions will the kids be given as potential prompts to ask the person in their family or in their neighborhood in order to conduct an interview that is useful. The same thing can happen with surveys. We have a great video on our website of a second grade teacher who's having the kids make the first pictograph that they're making on their own. They've made class pictographs before. So they have come up with questions together with her that they want to ask of their peers in the class. So let us imagine with my peers, with you all, what the questions are I want to ask of middle school kids in a science class who are conducting an interview about awareness or people's attitudes about climate change, things like that. All righty, I'm going to come to pedagogy now. These are a few ideas about conducting the class online, and there are 2 sites in blue here that have very good information about that. I won't go into their ideas because you can click this when I send you the email and look at the ideas for yourself. Let's see. This one I found particularly interesting for teachers that have ELL students. It's about them recording stories in a form that can be widely used, but it doesn't push them beyond their language competence now, but it does broaden their horizon a little bit for learning more and new vocabulary. And these are just a couple of ideas that I found today in Kim Marshall's newsletter, the Marshall Memo. I'll let you read those silently for about 30 seconds. Be fully present and model vulnerability. Well, we got 20 minutes left, so I'll put these last few out, and then we can start our open conversation. You, I'm sure, have been receiving these from your cheerful friends who want us to look on the bright side of life. This is a video that Sue Friedman sent me that is just delightful about a guy in Chicago who is flying kites to music, and it is just beautiful to watch for 3 minutes. It is uplifting in itself. These are some other ideas that I've gotten from friends for things to either do yourself or ask kids to do. In my walk around the block with my wife yesterday, I saw 3 middle school boys playing football while on skateboards. Now, of course, you want to wear latex gloves while you do it if the other kids are from your neighbors rather than yourself. But I do think that that's the secret of Tom Brady's success. Those gloves that the old quarterbacks wear. This one here is, in a sense, it's about mindfulness. It's about being in the moment. Every time I walk around the block with my wife, who's much more observant than I am, I see something I never saw before. And she says, oh, well, that's been there for at least 2 years. Now, that's not true with the poo on the satellite dish, but it is true with that cable that's holding up the magnolia tree in one of our neighbors' yards. So this is something you could ask your kids to do, as well as doing yourself. And this one is something that a crazy friend and I used to do. It creates fun and humor for kids to. So the idea here is come up with things like this, or ask your kids to come up with things like this to do, which they can then report about when you have classroom meeting with them. Or any other vehicle that you have created for remaining in communication with your kids. And remember, there isn't anything you can ask kids to do that cannot be converted into an academic way of representing it, whether it is verbal, speak in complete sentences, and tell me where the commas would be. This is reminding me of Victor Borge. Victor Borge was a concert pianist who became a comedian. and he has on one of his records a hysterical moment where he's telling a story and he's providing the punctuation with his mouth. So a period is, a comma is, and then he has other things where he makes the sounds for colons, semicolons, all the other things, or exclamation points. So imagine what fun a kid would have if you said, make up a story about when you walk backward around the block with 3 sentences in it and do the punctuation with your mouth. I'm just being a little crazy there, but what I'm saying is anything that you come up with that's fun, you can convert into something that can be curved into academics by the way in which the kids have to recreate the experience for those of us who are listeners or readers. All right, I got a little bit about internal PD. You know, since school districts are asking us to do this for them, we're thinking about this a lot, and in future webinars, I'll have more ideas about this. But here's an idea I got from Shani Colleen, who's the assistant superintendent with Keegan, Illinois. They're going to do book studies. She supervises the principals, so she's going to do book studies for all the principals. You could do it for a school staff. Deidre, you could do it for all of the academic coaches in your district. You know, create a group and pick a good book and do a book study online in the way you commonly do a book study. This particular skill, I think, as well as others that are available on online courses, I just put this one up because it's a plug for one that we teach, but we spent 2 years doing it. I think it's pretty good. Mary Ann Haley and I did it. And you get to see Susan Chester teaching with her kids, perhaps some other people who are on this webinar. But anyway, this is the kind of skill that is not common and is very easily learned through a good online course. Look around for others like that and find a group to do it with. I mean, you can do it alone, but doing it with other people, I think, is a real opportunity. I'm not going to have time today, but I will in future to get some really difficult questions dealt with, although we will have 15 minutes. But this is one that we got asked for another webinar that Deb Reed and I, who is signed on here, are going to do later in the week. And we do have some experience with this one, and we'll be able to respond to it. The final thought for me is this one here. There isn't, in the rush and the busyness of meeting all the needs we're being asked to respond to now, not a whole lot of time to introspect into yourself and myself and where we are in life. But I do think that this moment, and it's a moment that will last for months, as you all know, just from watching the news. You know, what do you and I, what do I have to learn from this experience? And who do I want to be when it's over? What do I want to be able to have people say about me as a person? Is it going to change as a result of the view, the perspective I have on the world and the fragility of things? You know, and the second part of this is, what do I most want to do when this is over as a person in life? So now, Jackie, it's time to open it. We have about 30.